How David first came to power. David's first major recognition from society was when he killed Goliath. Goliath was a major threat to Israel's military security because he was part of the Palestinian military. When David had killed Goliath, women were singing, and Saul, the man currently in power, got enraged at how David was being praised rather than him. This led to a rivalry between the two, and David had to flee. When David was given opportunities to kill Saul, he refused even though he knew the throne was on the line. Saul fell because after David left, Palestinians returned and God decimated the Israelite army. All of Saul's sons were killed except one, Ishbaal, who was anointed as Saul's successor. Southern elders went to Hebron, David's military base, and then anointed David as king over the house of Judah. As we see, David is not greedy for power, but knows God has decided who is in power, and David respects that. We can learn to be less greedy today, especially with money. Even though money means power, we should not get greedy with money. We also see how patience led to David becoming king. We see how he knew God would help choose the right king, and with patience, he was anointed king. How Solomon came to power. King David was old and could not keep himself warm despite him being provided with clothes. This is when people knew it was going to be time for a new king. Adonijah, son of Haggith and David, wanted to be king. He was handsome and young. Adonijah made sacrifices inviting many people around except warriors, prophets, and his brother Solomon. Now Adonijah thought he was king, but King David did not know about it. Solomon's mother was told to consult with David. She was told to say, "Did you not, my lord the king, swear to your servant, saying, 'Your son Solomon shall succeed me as king, and he shall sit on my throne'? Then why is Adonijah king?" After this was told to David, he announced Solomon to be the king to be. Solomon was now king and ruler over Israel and over Judah. David gave his last wishes to Solomon for peace and also who needs bloodshed. Then David slept with his ancestors. Construction of the Temple. Solomon prepares to build a massive house of the Lord. He prepares lumber, stone, and working men around 30,000. The house was being built 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. In comparison to modern measurements, this is 100 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 45 feet high. This was a really big building for the place of worship at the time, with walls of cedar and floors of cypress, and the inner air sanctuary that was 20 by 20 by 20 cubits. He filled the sanctuary with pure gold. He overlaid their whole house with gold so the whole house might be perfect. This ended up being Solomon's greatest achievement.
After Solomon's death, when his son Rehoboam was the leader of the house of Israel, people started to really hate that Solomon and Rehoboam put out heavy taxes. Many people didn't like the idea of taxes and they wanted a tax cut, and they threatened to get out another leader. Rehoboam talked to his advisors. The older advisors said that he should ease upon them. The younger advisors said that he should show him his power, then threaten the kingdom. That it could be a lot harder than his own father. This did not go well, and all the northern tribes decided to make a new kingdom called Israel. 10 of the 12 tribes did not accept Rehoboam as their leader and chose Jeroboam and kept the name of the king Israel for their kingdom. The other two tribes, the tribe of Judah and most of the tribe of Benjamin, accepted Rehoboam as his king and became the kingdom of Judah. In the southern part of Israel, Rehoboam also decides to wage war, but a prophet stops him. Jeroboam sees that his people are still connected to the temple in Jerusalem. They frequently go there to celebrate 3 festivals. Jeroboam is scared that they'll reunite and decides to make 2 new temples. He then puts golden calves and says words from the golden calf story, causing a violation against God. This causes them to be 19 new leaders in over 240 years, all being terrible and extremely corrupt. The story of the splitting of the 2 kingdoms, it mentions that it had festivals for Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And it says that the people from the kingdom still went to Jerusalem to celebrate these festivals. It shows to the modern Jewish people that they should do whatever they want to celebrate their faith. It also shows them that they should have heavy loyalty to God's wishes and be as peaceful as you can and follow the 10 Commandments. So you have a good future and not have pain. In the late 7th century BCE, the kingdom of Judah was controlled by the Assyrian Empire at the end of the century. They feared that the Neo-Babylonian Empire, since it was growing very quickly. Joshua, the king of Judah, in the battle. They then proceeded to beat Pharaoh Necho's army in 609 BCE. Some of the young nobles of Judah were taken by the Babylonians. In 589 to 587 BC, the king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, Nebuchadnezzar, appointed Zedekiah, a 20-year-old man, as the vassal king of Judah after he conquered Jerusalem. Zedekiah despised Babylon, so he revolted against him and sided with the Pharaoh of Egypt, Hophra, and separated from the Babylonian. Nebuchadnezzar was not happy and decided to invade Judah. He started a siege against Jerusalem in December of 859 BCE. Jerusalem was quickly taken over and conquered by Nebuchadnezzar. Zedekiah tried to escape, was caught, and watched his sons get killed. He was binded and held as prisoner until death. After that, he kept destroying Jerusalem and destroyed the Temple of Solomon. After the kingdom of Judah, after the conquering of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar wanted the Jews gone, so he exiled the Hebrews. It was called the Babylonian exile or the Babylonian captivity. During the exile, the Hebrews created wisdom books / wisdom literature that was made so the Jewish literature was easier to understand. The 3 books were Psalm, Proverbs, and the Song of Solomon. The exile lasted for 70 years and was ended by the Persian conqueror of Babylonia, Cyrus the Great. They then proceeded to rebuild their temple. It impacted the Jewish faith because when they were allowed to come back from exile, they built a new temple, and the Jewish faith increased a lot and brought a lot of new literature. Also, throughout the exile, the Hebrews kept faith and continued to work on their religion for the future generations. This gives an impact on Jewish faith because it tells the future of the Jewish people that you should continue your religion through hardships and you will be rewarded. The ward was being brought back from exile and were able to rebuild their temple. It also shows you that you should not lose faith in, and you should keep hold of your religion, so it can be passed down generations. It also thoroughly shows that even if the temples are destroyed in your city, that you still have faith and you can show to God that you still love Him.
Alexander the Great conquers Israel, 331 BCE. Alexander took over his father's role as a king when he was a teenager. He conquered the entire civilized world in a short period of time. When Alexander the Great arrived in Israel, he arrived during the region of the great high priest. Simon the great high priest knew he was coming and had 2 choices. One was to fight Alexander and his army off, which they knew they couldn't do. Instead, they could come to an agreement with Alexander and his army. When Alexander saw Simon, he dismounted his horse and bowed to him. When Alexander was questioned by his advisors, he told them that whenever he went into battle, he dreamed of an angel leading him to victory. The face of the Jewish high priest, he said, was the face of the angel he saw in his dreams. That was why Alexander bowed to him. This is the reason Alexander the Great did not want to destroy Israel and agreed on making an agreement with them. The Jews agreed to name every newborn boy Alexander. This is the reason the name Alexander is so common in the Jewish community. Alexander the Great did end up making an agreement with the great high priest to not kill everyone inside of Israel, but Alexander would be the one leading Israel. He then vanished all of the officials and administrators and replaced them with his own Greek officials. After Alexander died, Ptolemy took over the southern empire, and the northern empire was ruled by Seleucus. The 2 generals agreed upon everything except the line that divided the northern empire from the southern. This line passed right through where Israel was located. The Jews were divided. Some went to the south and a few went to the north. In the south, they were still allowed to practice their religion and keep their culture, while the north they would try to move them out by force. The Jewish people did not want to leave, which led to a war and them being kicked out of Israel. Jewish culture and civilization during the Hellenistic period was an intense dialogue with Hellenistic civilization. This began with the transition of Hebrew scriptures into Greek scriptures, as an example of the way in which Greek language impacted Jewish civilization. Jews joined in on Greek tradition as well as writing plays, poems, in all Greek languages.
This impacted the Jewish faith because they were scared that they were going to lose their religion due to Hellenization. This resulted in some Jewish people losing their religion and being forced to turn into Greek culture, and some that refused to turn into Greek culture would be killed. Maccabean Uprising, 164 to 100 BCE. The Seleucid Empire started to take control over all of Judah. Antiochus wanted to Hellenize the Jewish community. His goal was to remove any features in Judaism that could define it from the Greek religion. The Jewish people did not want to abandon their culture, but the Jewish community was then forced to learn about Greek culture. A small rebellion took place, and Antiochus was not happy. He vandalized the temple and made it a rule that if Jewish practices like circumcision and the Sabbath were followed, they would be killed. Many of the Jewish people listened to Antiochus, but some were still not happy. A rebellion started and later became a Jewish army that would fight Antiochus' 60,000 army. The Jewish army was severely outnumbered. However, the familiarity of Judah was a huge advantage for the Jewish army. Using the hills and knowledge of the area, they slowly picked him off, which led to them winning the fight. About the temple. The Holy Temple was the most important structure to the entire Jewish community in Jerusalem. It was the social and religious center of the Jewish people, not to mention the economic benefits of trading in the temple. More importantly, however, it was considered a sign of God's presence amongst them. Temple rebuilt. When Judah and his brothers went to the temple after the battle, they saw the destruction that Antiochus did to it. On December 25th, 165 BCE, after months of working and cleaning out the area, the temple was finally rebuilt to God. The celebration continued for 8 days, as I know to this day the celebration as Hanukkah. This impacted the Jewish faith because as the Seleucid Empire started taking over all of Judah, he was trying to completely wipe out the Jewish community and force Greek culture on them. A rebellion was created, but Antiochus figured out and vandalizes the temple. The revolution fought the Seleucid Empire and ended up defeating them. The Jewish army then rebuilt the temple and had 8 days celebration, which is now known as Hanukkah.